The studio lights over the Loose Women set were dialed up to a blistering intensity, a harsh, artificial noon that left nowhere to hide. The audience, packed tightly into the steep tiered seating, had settled into a hum of vibrating anticipation, the kind of electric buzz that usually precedes a prize fight rather than a midday talk show. On the curved desk, the mugs of water sat untouched. The branding was bright, the colors were cheerful, and the theme music had just faded into the polite applause that signals the start of a segment. But the atmosphere in the room told a different story. Sitting in the guest chair, a seat that looked comically undersized beneath his frame, was Jason Momoa. He didn't sit so much as occupy the space, his shoulders broad enough to block the view of the monitors behind him, his presence radiating a heavy, gravitational pull that seemed to warp the air around the panel. Ruth Langsford smiled, the professional anchor holding the ship steady, though her grip on her cue cards was noticeably tight. She offered the standard welcome, a practiced bridge between the commercial break and the reality of the live broadcast. She spoke of his blockbusters, his environmental work, his imposing physicality, weaving a tapestry of compliments designed to put a guest at ease. Jason offered a small nod, a slow, languid movement that didn't quite sync with the upbeat tempo of daytime television. He wore a distressed leather jacket that looked like it had seen more miles than the studio floor, and his hands, large and scarred, rested heavily on his knees. He looked relaxed, but it was the relaxation of a predator resting in high grass, still heavy and potentially kinetic. He wasn't playing to the cameras. He wasn't smiling for the red light. He was just there, existing in a frequency much lower and more grounded than the frantic energy of the production. The first few minutes followed the script. Ruth asked about the physical demands of his latest role, and Jason answered in a deep, rumbling baritone that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. He was polite, briefly mentioning the stunt work and the training, but his answers were concise. He didn't offer the anecdotal fluff that producers crave. He didn't tell a funny story about craft services. He answered the question and then stopped, leaving a vacuum of silence that Ruth had to quickly fill. To his left sat Denise Welch. She had been watching him since he walked out, her body angled slightly toward him, her posture rigid. While the other panelists, Colleen Nolan and Brenda Edwards, seemed content to bask in the celebrity glow, Denise was operating on a different wavelength. She held a pen poised over her notes, her eyes narrowing slightly as she tracked his eyeline. She wasn't smiling. The shift happened 6 minutes in. It wasn't an explosion. It was a temperature drop. Ruth had just wrapped up a question about ocean conservation, a softball topic meant to let Jason shine. He spoke passionately but quietly about single-use plastics, his voice taking on a somber edge. As he trailed off, the audience applauded respectfully. Ruth turned to the panel, signaling it was time for the group discussion. "Denise," she said, her voice carrying a hint of warning she tried to disguise as a segue, "you had a thought on this." Denise Welch shifted in her chair. She didn't look at her notes. She looked directly at Jason. "I do," she said. Her voice was calm, the tone of a school headmistress addressing a student who thinks they've gotten away with something. "Jason, it's lovely to hear you talk about the environment. It really is, and I think we all want to save the planet." She paused, letting the agreement hang there before introducing the blade. "But I have to ask because I think a lot of people watching at home are thinking it. You're a massive movie star. You travel the world constantly. Film sets are notorious for waste. You fly private, you drive big motorcycles." She tilted her head, a gesture of faux confusion. "Do you not feel there's a slight disconnect there? A bit of, do as I say, not as I do?" The audience went deadly silent. It was the kind of question that usually prompts a celebrity to laugh nervously, offer a mea culpa, or launch into a PR-approved speech about carbon offsets. Jason did none of those things. He didn't blink. He didn't shift his weight. He simply held Denise's gaze. The silence stretched out longer than was comfortable for live television. A second passed, then 3. The producer in the control booth likely hovered a finger over the button to cut to a wide shot, but the camera stayed tight on Jason's face. "A disconnect," Jason repeated finally. His voice was soft, devoid of the defensive spike Denise had likely anticipated. "That's the word you're using." Well, yes, Denise pressed, emboldened by his lack of immediate defense. It's a valid question. We see a lot of celebrities preaching to normal people about their carbon footprint while living lives of excess. I'm just wondering if you struggle with that hypocrisy. Jason leaned forward, the leather of his jacket creaking audibly in the quiet studio. The movement was slow, deliberate, closing the physical distance between them by only a few inches. Yet it felt like he had just loomed over the desk. I struggle with a lot of things, Denise, he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a rumble that felt less like speech and more like tectonic movement. I struggle with the fact that the oceans are dying. I struggle with the fact that we're running out of time. But I don't struggle with my choices because I know what's in my heart. But that's just a feeling, isn't it? Denise interrupted, her cadence quick, sharp, journalistic. Heart is lovely, but carbon is carbon. Do you not think the public deserves a bit more than just good vibes when they're being told to recycle their yogurt pots by someone on a private jet? The air in the studio seemed to thicken. Ruth looked ready to intervene, her mouth opening to soften the blow, but Jason raised a single finger. It wasn't an aggressive gesture, but it commanded immediate obedience. Ruth's mouth clicked shut. Jason kept his eyes locked on Denise. He wasn't looking at her as a host. He was looking at her as a specimen. You like the fight, Jason observed. It wasn't a question. You like to find the crack in the armor and stick your finger in it. You think if you push hard enough, you'll find the lie. Denise bristled, her chin lifting. I'm not looking for a fight, Jason. I'm looking for honesty. That's what this show is about. Real women, real talk. Real talk, Jason echoed, testing the phrase. He let a small, dry smile touch the corner of his mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes remained incredibly dark, incredibly still. Okay, let's have real talk. You're asking me about jets and bikes because you want to see if I'll apologize. You want to see the big guy bow his head. He paused, and the weight of his stare seemed to press Denise back into her seat. I won't. My work speaks for itself. My life is my life. I don't live it for a committee. So you don't care what the public thinks? Denise shot back, her voice rising slightly in pitch. Because without the public, you don't have a career. You don't have the platform to preach from. I don't preach, Jason said, his voice terrifyingly even. I share. There is a difference. Preaching is telling you what to do. Sharing is showing you what I love. If you feel judged, Denise, that is coming from inside you, not from me. A ripple of nervous energy moved through the audience. Someone in the back row coughed, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the tense quiet. Denise's face tightened. She had expected a debate. She was getting a psychological dismantling. She adjusted her blazer, a subconscious armor adjustment. I certainly don't feel judged, she said with a scoff that sounded brittle. I'm just asking the hard questions. That's my job. Is it? Jason asked. He turned his head slowly to survey the studio, taking in the bright lights, the pastel colors, the cameras on their rolling pedestals. Is your job to ask questions, or is your job to create a moment, to make the clip that goes on the internet? He turned back to her, and the intensity of his focus was like a physical weight. Because right now, you're not listening to me. You're waiting for your turn to speak. You're waiting to trap me. I'm not trying to trap you, Denise protested, her professional veneer showing a hairline fracture. I find that incredibly patronizing. Just because I'm challenging you doesn't mean I'm playing a game. We are on a set, Jason said, gesturing vaguely around him with a hand the size of a dinner plate. We are wearing makeup. There are people counting seconds in our ears. Everything here is a game. The only thing that isn't a game is what we feel. And right now, I feel you are very angry, and I am wondering why tonight. Ruth Langsford jumped in, her voice pitched high with forced cheerfulness. I think what Denise is trying to say is that people are just curious about the logistics. It's a fascination with the lifestyle. But moving on. No, Denise said, cutting across the anchor. She wasn't letting go. She couldn't let go. The dynamic had shifted, and she was losing ground, not because she was wrong, but because Jason refused to acknowledge her authority. She needed to reassert dominance. I'm not angry, Jason. I'm frustrated, Because we get a lot of Hollywood stars sitting in that chair, and they all do the same thing. They deflect. They turn it back on the interviewer. It's a very clever media training tactic. Oh, look at Denise. She's so aggressive. It avoids answering the question. Jason sat back in the chair. He crossed his arms over his chest, the leather straining. He looked at her with a mixture of pity and boredom. I answered you, he said. I said I don't struggle. You just didn't like the answer. Because it wasn't an answer, Denise snapped. It was a dismissal. Maybe the question deserved to be dismissed, Jason said. The gasp from the audience was audible this time. It was a low, collective intake of breath. This was a violation of the daytime code. Guests were supposed to be grateful. They were supposed to play along. Jason was effectively telling the host that her curiosity was beneath him, but he didn't say it with arrogance. He said it with a calm, factual certainty that was far more infuriating. Colleen Nolan tried to diffuse the situation. Jason, she said, leaning forward with a conciliatory smile, you seem like such a chill guy. Everyone knows you as this laid-back spiritual person. Does it bother you when people try to poke holes in that? Does it get under your skin? Jason looked at Colleen. His expression softened instantly, proving that his coldness toward Denise was a specific choice, a targeted weapon. It doesn't bother me, he said gently to Colleen, because I know who I am. If someone wants to poke holes, they are only poking holes in their own idea of me. I am not the idea, I am the man. But surely, Denise interrupted again, unable to let the moment settle, that image is part of the brand. The rugged, nature-loving outsider. It sells movie tickets. So when we ask about the authenticity of it, we're asking about the product you're selling. Jason's head snapped back to Denise. The softness vanished. The predator was back. I am not a product, he said. The words were spaced out, distinct. I am a father. I am a son. I am an artist. Do not call me a product. In this industry, we are all products, Denise countered, her voice hard. I'm a product. This show is a product. Let's not be naive. You might be a product, Jason said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that the microphone struggled to pick up. If you accept that, that is your sadness to carry. But do not put that on me. Denise's mouth opened, then closed. She looked flushed. The accusation of sadness was personal, intimate, and devastatingly dismissive. It bypassed the professional debate entirely and struck at her autonomy. She looked at her cue cards, her hands trembling slightly. She was a veteran of live TV. She had handled drunks, politicians, and divas. But she had never handled someone who simply refused to engage with the reality of the television format. Jason wasn't playing ping pong. He was catching the ball and crushing it in his hand. I think we need to take a break, Ruth said, her eyes darting to the floor manager, who was frantically signaling for a commercial. No, Jason said. It was a simple word, but it froze the room. Guests did not call the shots. Guests did not cancel commercial breaks. I think we should finish this, Jason said, looking at Denise. You have more you want to say. I can see it. It is burning a hole in your throat. Say it. Ruth looked helpless. The producers, sensing a viral moment that would eclipse anything they had planned, apparently decided to let the cameras roll. The break music didn't play. The red light stayed on. Denise took a breath. She composed herself. She realized she had to pivot. If she couldn't get him on hypocrisy, she would get him on behavior. Fine, she said, her voice steadier now. You want to finish it. Let's talk about your behavior right now. You come into our house, onto our show, and you act like you are above it. You're physically intimidating. You're shutting down questions. You're speaking to me like I'm a child. Do you think that's acceptable behavior for a role model? Intimidating, Jason mused. He didn't uncross his arms. Because I am big or because I am not smiling? Because of your attitude, Denise said. It's aggressive. It's simmering. You're sitting there looking like you're about to snap. It makes people uncomfortable. Does it make you uncomfortable, Denise? Jason asked. Yes, frankly it does, she replied. I feel like I have to walk on eggshells because you might explode. Jason stared at her. He didn't move a muscle. He let the silence build again. He let the audience look at him, sitting perfectly still, hands relaxed, breathing even. He let the contrast between her accusation and his physical reality sink in. "I haven't raised my voice," Jason said calmly. "I haven't insulted you. I haven't stood up. I am just sitting here. If my presence makes you uncomfortable, you have to ask yourself why you are so afraid of a man standing his ground." "It's not about standing your ground," Denise argued, though her voice sounded thinner now. "It's about basic courtesy. You're being rude." "Courtesy," Jason said, tasting the word. "Courtesy is answering questions. I did that. Courtesy is being honest. I am doing that. But you want submission. You want me to play the game where I apologize for my life so you can feel better about yours. And because I won't do it, you call me rude. You call me aggressive." He leaned in closer, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that felt almost invasive. "That is an old trick. You paint the big man as the monster so you can be the victim. It is a weak move." "I am not playing a victim," Denise exclaimed, her voice cracking slightly. "I am a journalist asking a question." "You are a host on a daytime talk show," Jason corrected, "and you are used to people being afraid of you. You are used to people wanting your approval. I don't need your approval, Denise. I don't need you to like me, and that drives you crazy." The room was silent. The air conditioning hummed, a low drone underlining the standoff. Brenda Edwards looked at the floor. Ruth was frozen. This was the core of the conflict, stripped bare. It wasn't about the environment. It wasn't about movies. It was about power. Denise Welch was used to holding the power of the question, the power of the moral high ground. Jason Momoa had simply walked in and refused to acknowledge that power existed. "You think you know everything," Denise whispered, her venom replaced by a cold, shaking anger. "You come here with your jewelry and your philosophy, and you think you're better than us, better than this show." "I think I am real," Jason said. "And I think this," he waved a hand at the set, the lights, the cameras, "is a cage you have built for yourself. You sit here every day and you judge people. You talk about their marriages, their clothes, their mistakes. You feed on it, and then when someone looks back at you, really looks at you, you panic." "We discuss the news," Denise said, defensive now, her back against the wall. "We discuss topics that matter to women." "You discuss gossip," Jason said softly. "You discuss pain, and you wrap it in bright colors and call it entertainment." "That is unfair," Ruth interjected, finding her voice at last. "We champion many causes here. We support women." Jason turned to Ruth, and his expression was almost sad. "Then why is she attacking me?" He gestured to Denise. "I came here to talk about a movie. I came here to talk about art. She made it about character. She made it personal. Is that supporting causes? Or is that just blood sport?" Ruth didn't have an answer. She looked at Denise, hoping for a de-escalation, but Denise was locked in. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She felt the humiliation of the moment burning in her chest. She had lost control of the interview, and worse, she had lost the moral argument in front of a live audience. "You're a bully, Jason," Denise said. The words were quiet, meant to be the final nail in his coffin, the label that would stick. "You use your size and your silence to bully people into shutting up." Jason laughed. It was a single, short bark of a laugh, devoid of humor. "A bully," he repeated. He uncrossed his arms and placed his hands flat on the table. The sound of his rings clicking against the surface was the only noise in the room. "Denise, if I wanted to bully you, I wouldn't need to speak. If I wanted to intimidate you, I wouldn't be sitting in this chair." He stood up. The movement was smooth, hydraulic. He rose to his full height, towering over the desk, his head passing the level of the studio lights so that shadows cast down over his face. The audience gasped and leaned back, a collective flinch. Security guards at the edge of the stage took a half step forward, their hands hovering near their belts. Denise flinched, jerking back in her chair, her eyes widening in genuine alarm. But Jason didn't move toward her. He didn't lunge. He didn't shout. He simply stood there, occupying his full space, a monument of flesh and leather and unyielding gravity. He looked down at Denise, who now looked very small in her bright blazer. You see, Jason said, his voice rolling over the studio like thunder. I stand up and you are afraid. Why? I haven't threatened you, I haven't touched you, but you are afraid because you know deep down that all your words, all your questions, all your little traps, they are nothing against reality. Sit down, Denise said, her voice trembling. Please sit down. No, Jason said. I don't think I will. He remained standing. The dynamic was now visually broken. The camera angles were all wrong. The host was looking up. The guest was he was looking down. The power structure of the talk show, the seated, equal row of women judging the singular guest, was shattered. Jason had physically rejected the premise of the tribunal. You want to control the narrative, Jason said, looking at the camera now, breaking the fourth wall. You want to clip this and put a title on it. Jason Momoa snaps. Jason Momoa attacks Denise. Go ahead, do it. But the people watching, they see what is happening. They see a man refusing to be small so a woman can feel big. That is misogynistic, Denise spat out, finding one last weapon in her arsenal. Turning this into a man versus woman issue. That is classic toxic masculinity. Jason looked back down at her. His expression was weary. It is not about man or woman, Denise. It is about truth and lies. You are paid to lie. You are paid to pretend you care. I am not paid to pretend. I care about this show, Denise yelled, finally losing her composure completely. I care about our viewers, and you are disrespecting them. I am respecting them enough to show them the truth, Jason replied calmly. The truth is we are not friends. This is not a conversation. This is a transaction, and I am canceling the transaction. Then go, Denise gestured to the exit, her arm shaking. If it's so terrible, if we're so awful, just leave. Walk off. Give us the headline you say we want. The audience held its breath. This was the moment. The walkout. It was the climax every producer dreamed of. The chair shove, the storming off, the empty seat. It would be played on news cycles for weeks. But Jason Momoa didn't move. He stood there, planted like a redwood. He looked at the exit, then he looked back at Denise. A slow, cryptic smile spread across his face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who has realized they hold all the cards. No, Jason said softly. I won't leave, because if I leave, you win. If I leave, you get to say I couldn't handle the heat. You get to sit there and shake your head and talk about how troubled I am. He placed his hands back on the back of his chair, leaning his weight on it, creating a tableau of dominance. I will stay right here, Jason said. I will stand here until the credits roll, and we will sit in this silence together. And everyone watching will see you squirm. They will see that you don't know what to do with a man who doesn't follow your script. Denise stared at him, mouth slightly open. She looked to Ruth. Ruth looked to the producers. There was no protocol for this. Security couldn't remove a guest who wasn't being violent. They couldn't cut to break because he had already refused it, and cutting the feed would look like censorship. They were trapped. Ask me another question, Denise, Jason challenged, his voice low and mocking. Go ahead. Ask me about my motorcycle. Ask me about my hair. Ask me anything. But know that I am not playing anymore. Denise swallowed hard. Her throat clicked in the silence. She looked down at her cards. The words on them seemed irrelevant now. Ask about Aquaman's sequel. Ask about workout routine. They were questions for a compliant celebrity, not for the immovable object standing 3 feet away. She looked up at him, trying to summon the fire that had made her famous, the indignation that fueled her career. But under the weight of his stare, the fire flickered and died. She felt exposed. She felt the eyes of the audience, the eyes of the cameras, the eyes of the nation, peeling back the layers of her performance. Denise started, but her voice failed. I am waiting, Jason said. The silence returned, heavier than before. It wasn't an empty silence, it was a pressurized container. It was the sound of a studio holding its breath, waiting for a resolution that wasn't coming. Jason didn't fidget. He didn't look away. He stood there, a dark, leather-clad statue in the middle of the pastel set, forcing the show to grind to a halt around him. Ruth Langsford looked at the clock. There were still 4 minutes of airtime left. 4 minutes of eternity. She cleared her throat, a desperate sound. Well, she squeaked, it certainly has been a spirited discussion. Jason didn't look at Ruth. He kept his eyes on Denise. Denise looked down at her hands, unable to meet his gaze anymore. She had been defeated, not by an argument, but by a presence. She had tried to deconstruct a celebrity and had broken her teeth on a man. Look at me, Denise, Jason commanded softly. Slowly, painfully, Denise raised her eyes. That is better, Jason said. Now you are being real. Now you are scared. Now you are human. That is the most interesting you have been all day. Denise's lip trembled. She said nothing. She couldn't speak. The narrative had been stripped from her. We, Ruth stammered, looking at the camera with wide, panicked eyes. We seem to have run out of time for questions. Jason stood there. He didn't wave goodbye. He didn't thank them. He just watched Denise Welch crumble into silence. The theme music didn't play. The producers didn't know what to do. The camera lingered on the two of them, Jason standing tall, dark, and imposing. Denise seated, small and silent. It was a portrait of total uncomfortable defeat. That's it, Jason said, his voice the final sound in the broadcast. That's the show. He didn't move. Denise didn't move. The audience didn't clap. The image just held there, a frozen moment of raw, unresolved tension, broadcasting into millions of living rooms across the country. The feed cut to black not with a flourish, but with a sudden jarring snap, leaving the viewers sitting in their own silence, wondering what exactly they had just witnessed.